Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing coverage of A Game of Thrones, bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis this side of the wall.
Oh, okay.
I guess.
Look at that.
This is
Look
the
at
chapter.
that.
We're talking about Jon 6 today. This is the chapter where he finally takes his vows with Samwell Tarly and becomes a brother of the Night's Watch. We've got a big old discussion for you. We've each got some fun theories. But before that, Maggie, why don't you give us a nice little recap of what happened in this chapter? Spoilers for everything in the book and the show.
Let me tell you, this is A Game of Thrones, Jon number 6. It is the morning of the day that Jon is going to take his vows. He and those 8 other guys are going to officially join the Night's Watch.
They're having apple cakes.
Apple cakes.
Did you note the food?
Every time the food is described, let me tell you something. Never in my life have I been like, you know what sounds good right now? Blood sausage. And yet, when it was described on the page, I was like, I could go for some apple cakes and blood sausage. I could get behind that.
Okay, so he listed the apple cakes first.
Yes.
So that got me on board.
I was like, I'm ready. Fall is here. Let's go.
It was a little bit soured for me with the blood sausage.
No, I liked it. Well, it's perfect for the setting. They're in the cold. They need the protein and the meat.
If you give a little bit of color to the blood sausage, if you say it's crispy, if you say it's got a nice crust, maybe it was baked in
maybe
something.
He could have gone into that
There's
a bit
a way
more.
to distract me from the blood and make me focus on the sausage part.
Sure. I just think there's something about the way he described, like, I also, for context, I was vegan for years. I was vegetarian for even longer. Now I just sort of I eat meat less often than most people, and I also enjoy my life while I can. I want this blood sausage so bad. It's so weird. Anyway, let's refocus. So Jon's eating some bloody sausage and some apple cakes, and he's going to take his vows that night. And remember the last chapter, Jon had basically convinced them to let Sam join the stewards because he would be like Maester Aemon's, right-hand man, essentially. And Sam is so excited, and Jon is really happy for him. And so they all gather in the Sept, and they're going to get their assignments for, the rest of their time as brothers of the Night's Watch. There are 3 options. You can go to the stewards, you can be with the builders, or you can be with the rangers. So everybody's excited. Everybody's listed out. Jon is listed last, and they say, Jon, you're going to the stewards. And he goes, excuse me? He is not happy.
He's a bit of a diva in this chapter.
He's being a real diva. He's like, but I'm the best rider. I'm the best swordsman. Why am I not with the Rangers? Blah, blah, blah. And he's like, it's not fair, Mom.
He's kind of like Harry arguing with the Sorting Hat.
It's a lot like that. Yeah, except Harry at least has some reason to him. Yeah. And Jon's just like,
Harry's not flipping his hair.
Yeah, right. He's like, I don't want to go to the stewards. I don't want to change the sheets. And Sam's like, Jon, don't you get it? Like, you're going to be the Lord Commander's personal assistant. He's obviously like preparing you for leadership.
You're being groomed for command.
Yeah, right. And Jon's like, oh, you're so right. And so he sort of has this moment of realization, feels really ashamed of how he's been acting. He's like, okay, I'm going to take my vows. We're going to do this. And Jon elects to take his vows not in the Sept, but in front of the old gods, because he's from the Starks. He worships the old gods. So they're going to take him out beyond the wall to just to the edge, to the haunted forest where there's a circle of weirwood trees, because they don't have like a god's wood. And Sam goes with them because Sam says, it's so sad. He says, the 7 never heard my prayers. Maybe the old gods will. And we're just like, oh, Sam. And so they go out there with some rangers, and they bring Ghost with them as well. And they go in this circle of 9 weirwood trees, and they take their vows. And Cam, approximately how many goosebumps did you get when you read the vows? Because I got approximately 5 million. I was like, oh.
If I didn't have them on a t-shirt, maybe it would have hit me harder, but I see them every time I flip through my clothes.
Well, I wear that t-shirt a lot too, but I never read it. I never read it. I just see at the top, it says like Night's Watch, and I'm like, cool, it's gray and comfy. Maybe we'll post a pic of that t-shirt.
It is. It's one of the rare t-shirts with a graphic on it that doesn't have that heavy, awful print.
It's one of the better
comfortable.
Like Game of Thrones fan t-shirts out there. It's because it's like kind of subtle. I mean, it's not, but it's not. It doesn't have the HBO logo in the corner. You know what I mean?
And I think that was a Target original. Versus the House of the Dragon shirt that we got from Target.
Terrible.
That's terrible. It's just the only one.
Yes. But anyway, so they do that, and it's amazing, and it's great. And then Ghost has been off hunting while they're doing that, and he comes back, and he's carrying in his hand... Oh, no, shoot. He's carrying in his mouth a hand. And they're like, oh, shit. And that's how the chapter ends.
Yes.
So this beautiful, like, ending moment of, oh, we took our vows, and then there's a little moment of, ominousness at the end. So that's where
Two things off the bat. One, what if it was apple sausage and blood cakes?
Now that is interesting. I mean, I've had like a chicken apple sausage.
That's what I'm saying.
What's a blood cake though?
I don't know.
That's
Halloween. We just passed Halloween. No. When is this coming out?
Coming out right after Halloween.
Oh,
Happy end of Halloween. How did it go? Put it in the comments below.
Second thing I really appreciate, as all of Jon's chapters, since he's settled in with his brothers, I mean, I know he's just now becoming a brother, but with all these guys at the Night's Watch,
right?
I like that all of these Jon chapters involve how important it is to check your friends.
Yeah.
Because I like that whether it's them checking him or him checking them, there is an honesty in communication between these people that is admirable. We talk about male friendships all the time.
Well,
I really love this aspect of his POV.
Me too. And especially because they make it a point to say this in the chapter when the Lord Commander is sort of like reminding them what this kind of commitment is that they don't have any families. So normally in your real life, your family members are the ones who check you. Your partner, your siblings, maybe your parents or your kids, depending on your age, like they're usually the ones who can be like more honest with you. And like maybe friends have a bit of distance and politeness. But here, the Night's Watch, like they are each other's family. They're all they have. So they have to be like super honest and, upfront with each other.
That's a fantastic point.
I like that a lot.
You're
welcome. I'm actually a family psychologist, and that's who I am.
And a podcaster on the side.
That's me. I'm actually not a psychologist. Please don't quote me on that. Anyway,
I have one big thing to play with for this chapter. I really just enjoyed the movements of this. I've been anticipating this chapter. That line where Sam says you're being groomed for command. That's one of the most hype moments in season 1 of the show for me.
I don't remember it at all.
So I just I don't know why I have that line just like in granite, kind of etched in stone in my head.
That's cool.
So I loved knowing that it was coming up, and then this moment it was kind of euphoric for me.
Neat.
But I don't have anything to say about that. I enjoyed a lot of this chapter. The thing that caught me, and this was right around the end of reading the chapter, I started thinking about the prologue again. Because if you zoom out, and maybe if you were to make an outline of what happens in this chapter, zoom out and just see where the plot moves, where they are, what they're doing, it's very similar to the prologue. You've got some brothers of the Night's Watch in eerie, snowy woods beyond the wall. You've got this shadow of White Walkers kind of in the distance.
Sure.
Everyone's kind of scared of every noise, and every time a twig breaks, and they all turn around.
And they keep talking about, hey, it's about to get dark soon. We got to take cover. Yeah.
There's a ghost story kind of element to it. And then at the very end of the chapter, there's this flash of violence and human remains.
Okay, yeah.
So it's
I
sort
like that.
of what we do in the prologue. But because we know these characters, because we've settled into this world, it hits us very differently. And the main difference between this and the prologue is kind of the first half of the chapter, which is them talking to their superiors and their brothers at Castle Black. And the difference is in the pageantry. It's that discussion of tradition. It's the ceremony that they're getting ready for. It's the vows that we finally hear. So in that new context, with that more human element, you said you're a psychologist before, with that, applying that to, on paper, this is kind of like the prologue, I wanted to re-examine the prologue in this new light.
Okay.
Because when we read the prologue, it's such a great table setter because you get the power of the White Walkers. These guys who don't seem that smart or organized just get annihilated by some weird zombies in the woods, and that hypes up the weird zombies as a great threat. But looking back on them now, I feel more of a charitable view towards them because I've gotten to know all these other Brothers of the Night's Watch.
Yeah.
So the question to you is, did the Brothers of the Night's Watch in the prologue, did they fail?
Fail how? Like, I mean, they died, so yeah, they failed in that way. Did they fail as Brothers of the Night's Watch? I mean, yes,
because when you read the prologue,
deserted.
They're just like these NPCs who get murked by the zombies. But looking at them now, like, did they fail? Because this chapter does elucidate the mission, the goals, the job of all of these different guys. I mean, I mentioned the sorting hat before. It's like that for careers.
Yeah.
We do kind of get sorted. We get given occupations and primary directives here. On paper, the guys in the prologue, they're wiped out by the White Walkers, and then one of them survives only to be beheaded at Winterfell.
Well, right, yeah.
But if you look at the charitable view, I don't think they did fail, because they did put up a fight against the White Walkers.
That's true.
They defended the realm, which is part of their vows, and technically they even got word back to civilization and told everyone the fucking White Walkers are out there.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking about most, is this idea of protecting the realm. Their whole point is to protect the realm, not any one house or any one area of Winterfell, of Westeros, but the entire realm. And that one guy who does escape makes it back to Winterfell, and I'm trying to remember how much he says or how much he tries to warn them. I mean, I'm sure he says something, I just don't remember, and I don't think we actually see it happen on the page. I think, like, you know, Maester Lewin like describes what he says or something, but but it doesn't really work though, because the Starks don't seem to really pay attention to what the guy says.
But
and
that's
they're like,
not his job. His job is to report the information, which he does.
But I'm saying, is it effective? I don't think so. What's much more effective, and even still that's not very much, is Lord Mormont talking to Tyrion when Tyrion's at the wall. That's a much more effective way to pass the word along. So I don't know. I mean, they give it a good shot, and you're right. I don't look at them so badly, I guess, because they do put up a good fight and they do try. And it seems like, I can't remember what their reason for deserting is. I'm sure it's explained in the prologue, but I can't remember.
It kind of brings me back to the conversation we had last week about how much a character's death comes to define them in this world, because I was judging those guys because they lost immediately.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Sorry. Actually, the guys didn't desert. Just the one guy did when he ran away after surviving. I'm thinking that the three guys had left the Night's Watch and were trying to survive. That's not what happened. They were on a ranging mission. I'm remembering now.
The one guy who looks like Matt Damon?
Yeah. They were on a mission. They were doing something for the wall, for the Night's Watch. And then the one guy who survived deserted so that he could tell people about what he saw. Sorry, I'm remembering now. So yeah, no, they didn't fail at all. They were doing their best.
And for me, this chapter being sort of a redux of the prologue, it was that adjustment of perspective. And you can feel this in all of the clarifications that Mormont and all the other higher-ups give to these recruits when they're telling them how to get ready for taking their vows, to think about the words, to say them, because they're serious, and, you know, this is a magical binding contract.
Yeah, sure.
Was that him who said that?
No, that's the Goblet of Fire.
No, I know, but that was the...
It's a Barty Crouch.
That was my Barty Crouch voice.
Oh, it was very good.
Thanks. So, yeah, it is that adjustment of perspective from the kind of selfishness that we've seen in a lot of this quote-unquote grimdark fantasy from the year and a half we spent with The Witcher through most of these Game of Thrones chapters. There is an emphasis on the individual and narrativity and my goals and my achievements. And you even see Jon sort of ashamedly embody this when he starts whining about how things aren't fair.
Right.
And underlying that idea of fairness is this almost entitlement and perspective of your own achievement and the world being oriented around you and your story and everything being just for you. It's an incredibly insular, selfish perspective. And we blow open that perspective in this chapter. That is sort of the brute force narrative imposed on these recruits by the higher ups, where they're telling you, no, there is no you anymore.
Right.
You are part of the collective. The focus for the rest of your lives now is on the group. It's on the greater good, and it's on the higher ideals that you're about to say to a tree.
Right, yeah.
We're shifting perspectives. We're using a wider lens to see more of kind of the scale of time. Most of these guys are like teenagers.
They're young.
And they're now, in this chapter, they have to start thinking about their entire future, their careers for the rest of they don't retire. This is the rest of their lives being decided here.
Yeah.
We're making lifelong oaths. We're talking about gods. We could not widen the aperture anymore here. We could not zoom out further. The scale has massively increased in the way we talk about these guys' lives. And then when we get to the vows themselves, there's even more of this. This is the part that I want your perspective on, because I thought it was pretty funky.
Okay.
There's almost an explicit rejection that the individual has a future.
Okay.
There are constant references to these brothers of the Night's Watch not bearing sons, not having wives, and not fathering any sons. And within this kind of fantasy world, which is always about inheritance and families and houses and sons,
sure.
and, Darth Vader's my dad. And within all of that, this explicit thing of you're not going to have any kids, your name's going to stop, your house is going to stop, this is it. That is, in genre fiction, a more permanent type of death. But it's also a callback to the scale and sacrifice that I've been talking about. And it emphasizes the scale and sacrifice of those meaningless guys who died in the prologue. Because that's also the end of their lines and maybe their houses. We didn't even get to know them that well, but it makes their deaths seem more tragic, seem more permanent. There's more of a loss here 45, 46 chapters later. And it makes you think about the vow differently and the oath that they're taking to the Night's Watch. Because, and this is my contention, I think part of the oath here is to die.
Oh, okay.
Either in service of the Night's Watch, or if you desert, you're then killed.
That's true.
So part of the promise they're making is to die. It's not just the rejection of the individual in favor of the collective. They're pledging to die.
And to die
It's
in this
built
very permanent way.
Yes.
Right. Interesting. I think that's great, especially interestingly enough, because they are in a sense protecting the realm from death. The Night Walkers, Maggie, the White Walkers represent death. Like they are death, incarnate. And so they are sort of taking taking the sacrifice for the realm. They are dying instead of everybody else in the realm. They're accepting that death willingly.
And you're dying to fight death. Like, we talked about this, again, from the prologue, from the very first episode we did on this book. I remember the infographic. It said death on two legs, which is a reference to a Queen song. But I was saying that the White Walkers are this living embodiment of death. And that this dichotomy between life and death was the central conflict and theme of this whole series. Based on this chapter, the Night's Watch guys are also death on two legs.
I see.
Like, we're almost blurring the line between these undead zombies and these guys who have just pledged to die. We're putting the brothers in the Night's Watch and the White Walkers on the same level there. What do you make of that?
I know what you mean. That's really interesting. And I want to look at the vows again, because I feel like there's some line in there about, describing what they are. They say something like, I am the sword of the darkness, the watcher on the walls, the fire that burns against the cold, the light that brings the dawn, the horn that wakes the sleepers, the shield that guards the realms. So yeah, they don't call themselves night or death or like darkness or shadow, but sort of like the thing that stands in between.
Kind of sounds like the White Walkers hiding in the shadows.
Sure, yeah, but they essentially are, and that's really interesting.
And
I like that.
The whole thing that threw us when we were watching the show is, well, death was supposed to be permanent and meaningful in this show, and killing Ned Stark was kind of the mission statement for this whole world. Why is Jon coming back from the dead? That makes more sense if you think of Jon as another White Walker, because their whole thing is being undead.
That's true.
And being this undead zombie.
That's true.
And maybe that's what Jon does. Blurring this line, it seems important to me.
Yeah. Well, and also I was thinking about Jon's death a lot here too, because part of what the vows say is that that my watch will not end until my death. And I was thinking about Jon as
Which one?
Well, yes, exactly, because Jon, in the later seasons, and again, we don't know what's happening canonically in the books, but at least what we have in the later seasons is he's sort of struggling with, should I ascend beyond just being, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch? What sort of power should or shouldn't I seek out? And you might initially think, well, he can't abandon the Night's Watch. He swore a vow, but it says it shall not end until my death. Well, he did already die. So does that kind of let him off the hook and he can do something else now? Does he get to take a new vow, take a new watch, take a new commitment, So but I like that. That preoccupation with death is very, very strong here.
It's getting more complicated.
Yeah, it is.
It's not just like a selfless fatalism of, people talk about the wall as joining the military or any of these kind of easy analogs. I think it's becoming further and further from that as we get more of the mechanics and the obligations of people who live at the wall.
Yeah.
We're not focusing on the selfless part, we're focusing on the fatalism part. And we're complicating that death allegory.
Yeah, it's nice. And of course them wearing all black is just a nice little symbolic, easy, shortcut into them representing death and shadow and stuff. That's really fun. I like that. I was thinking a lot about Jon and his role here and sort of our connections to the last few chapters, the last couple chapters. 2 chapters ago we had a Dany chapter, and that's like our, as we're calling it, our Targaryen checkpoint, and that was where we got the prophecy about the stallion who will mount the world. And we talked a lot about that and what that means and how that connects potentially to Jon and about the prince that was promised. And then the last chapter was Ned, where we talked about Ned's obsession with Lyanna and what that means and how that connects to Jon and stuff. So as I was going through this chapter, anytime now that I'm reading a Jon chapter, I'm looking for Targaryen stuff. I can't help it. And I don't always mean that it's intentional on George's part, but it's still fun to think about. So as I was going through and finding all of these connections to just the Targaryen house in general, it was sort of gently leading me towards, and then very overtly leading me towards, these prophecies. So I'm going to kind of break that down. So we talked about the blood sausage. Immediately when I read that, I thought about Dany eating the horse heart.
Ooh.
Right? This like bloody thing that she's eating that comes from an animal. That's
fire and blood sausage.
Right. And so she's eating the blood sausage, the horse heart as this way to strengthen her son. It's like a ritualistic thing. It's a way to give her, the stallion who will mount the world, this power and ability and strength. And Jon is just eating because it's breakfast. But I don't know. He didn't have to say blood sausage. He could have said, blackened bacon, or he could have said ham, or
the crust of bread, the bacon grease.
Right. He could have said anything, and he chose blood sausage. And I thought that was interesting. So let's just keep hold on to that one.
The apple cake who will mount the world.
Well, maybe not. And then when Jon is thinking about how he doesn't want to take his vows in the Sept, he wants to go to be in front of the weirwood trees, the narration says, "The gods of the Sept had nothing to do with him. The blood of the first men flowed in the veins of the Starks." So we hear the Targaryens spout there's a lot of obsession amongst them about like obsession with blood and bloodlines and the purity of blood and the blood of, and the blood of the dragon and this kind of this ancient power of like old Valyria. Jon's clinging to the power of like this ancient power of the first men, but still there's a connection there. This like the importance of bloodlines and ties back to ancient power. We also learn that Jon is going to need to keep a fire burning in Lord Mormont's chambers. So that's just a little fire thing. That's a fun thing. But this is where it gets interesting. When Jon finds out he's going to be a steward, he's furious, right? And it says that Jon's rage was such that he would have smashed the wall in an instant and the world be damned. And it says that Jon turned on Sam in a fury and he blazed back at Sam with, a comeback. And that reminded me so much of Viserys, whose anger is very, violent and aggressive and uncontrollable and spills out of him and blazes out of him, right? But the difference between Jon and Viserys is that Viserys, as we said last chapter, I think, never recognizes his own mistakes. But Jon does here. Jon recognizes that he's wrong to be this angry. It says, suddenly Jon Snow was ashamed, and he says, "You have the right of it. I was acting the boy." So Jon sort of goes through this aging, this maturity thing here, and he recognizes that he shouldn't be this angry, which is something Viserys never did. But it's like a hint that Jon still has some of that Targaryen rage and fire in him. But after that shift, after he recognizes his mistake, that's when we get to see Jon not only in this sort of Targaryen mindset, these Targaryen connections, we see him connected to Ned. Ned had a dream at the beginning of last chapter where he's in the crypt at Winterfell and he's seeing Lyanna and her statue and all the other kings at Winterfell down there. And when Jon is going through the passage that leads out of the wall, it says the air was colder than a tomb. And so I thought about Jon being down in the crypts at Winterfell. So Jon, again, is dreaming about Lyanna and her his promise to her, which by extension means he's thinking about Jon. So I liked that connection there.
Also, if the thing you're getting, I love this parallel. But I mean, it's basically like the fire and blood of Jon Snow.
Yes, right.
To make that Lyanna connection even stronger, in Ned's dream in the last chapter, she was crying blood.
Ooh, that's true. Oh, that's perfect. I was wondering about that. Because I remember we talked about it. I was like, it looks really cool. But apart from that, what does it do?
And the crypt is lit by torchlight.
Sure, yeah.
Because it's underground.
That's true. I do like that.
Very
yes,
nice.
Fabulous. But so Jon sort of like is going through this journey. He's got these Targaryen connections. He's demonstrating the fiery anger of a Targaryen, but then he sort of recognizes the error of his ways, and the Stark part of him kind of brings him back to center. And then he's thinking about being in this tomb, and we're thinking about Ned's dream in the crypt. And so then he takes his vows. And I think here where he's taking his vows is he's kind of cementing himself in his own prophecy. Before he takes his vows, when Lord Mormont is sort of reminding everybody what kind of commitment this is, he says a few things that I thought were really interesting. One thing he says is that a man of the Night's Watch lives his life for the realm. So think about the realm and think about the stallion who will mount the world and unite everybody. Just think about that. Because it also says, on the wall, we are all one house. Jorah tells Dany that the stallion who mounts the world will unite all of the Dothraki into a single Khalasar. So Jon is no longer thinking about one house or one Khalasar, one call, but he's
one love, one direction.
But he's thinking about the realm as a whole, uniting everybody. And this is my favorite thing, is that it says that Jorah tells Dany that the stallion who mounts the world will ride to the ends of the earth. And where does Jon go here? It says they had ridden past the end of the world.
Damn.
Jon is literally at the end of the world. He's already there. He's already fulfilling this prophecy. And so like by taking his vows, he is sort of cementing himself within that stallion who mounts the world prince that was promised thing. And then there's one more little element that I think ties it all in a bow.
A little cherry on top.
Because last chapter we were talking about Lyanna and Promise Me Ned, and the word promise comes up 1,000 times. And I feel so dumb for not connecting this before, but the prince that was promised, when Jon is taking his vows, what are vows but a promise? And then even still, I went back and was looking at the Dany chapter where Jorah is talking about that prophecy of the stallion who mounts the world, and he says to Dany, like he tells her about it, and he says, or so it was promised. So I feel like this is the moment where it's really cemented that all of these prophecies from all these different places around Westeros, from these different cultures and different times, they're all one and the same. And it's like so obviously about Jon. And I just thought it was so nice the way it all came together. It made me very excited.
No, I think that's honestly some of the best analytical work you've ever done.
Thank you.
That was a joy to watch and listen to. I think I can jump on that a little bit.
Yeah, please.
Because I had a little bit, I'm trying to keep this Prince That Was Promised thing in the air. I think it's fascinating. And I'm looking for it now because I find it fruitful and completely convincing. And in the context of the last few chapters we've talked about, remember, we had 2 chapters in a row killing off inadequate kings. And now in this chapter, if you look at the mechanics of the ceremony where, you what was it? You knelt as boys and now
you rise as men. It's nice.
So we just lost 2 kings.
Yeah.
So there are some vacancies in the monarchy here.
Yeah.
This ceremony for Jon is more or less him being knighted.
Right. And not technically, because like Mormont says a lot, like there are no kings, you serve no king, there's none of that. But
right. In the same way Viserys wasn't technically a king. In the same way Robert didn't have any sons, so he was kind of not doing the thing either. Like
sure.
There are asterisks on all of these elements. But if you blur the lines and apply the classic, fantasy, medieval, hierarchical framework, it works as a knighthood for Jon.
Yeah.
But
it's an initiation and like this like transition into this new really important role.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it changes how we think of him. So here's the question, because I'm trying to always get more ammunition for the Prince That Was Promised thing. How does this more or less knighthood for Jon Snow right up against these kind of juxtaposed with these chapters where we're killing off all these kings and making all these vacancies, how does that change the expectations we have for Jon?
Well, right. Because
I think the narrative is constantly pushing us to think of him as this once and future king.
Sure, because his only expectation for himself is, I want to be this really great ranger. He basically wants to be his Uncle Benjen. That's what he wants to be. Like, that's as big as his dreams are. And those are pretty big. He wants to be this, like, really high-ranking ranger. He wants to, like, protect the realm, be this, basically the closest thing to a knight that he can be, because he can't be an actual knight because he's a bastard, but like this is the closest he can get, and he's really excited about honor. Like that's like his big thing. And so we want that for him, and we're in his head, we're in his narrative, so we do want that for him. But you're right, there's all these other things going on in the narrative that make you expect and want a whole lot more for him. And even if you don't know, and if you're a first time reader, obviously I don't know Jon's a Targaryen. There have been little hints here and there, but it's still gonna come as a shock when I find out. I don't know. We haven't even heard mention of the prince that was promised yet, so I don't even know about that. But still, I feel like the stallion who mounts the world connections are like, they're there even if I don't know about Jon's Targaryen connection. Like I can make the leap via Ned. Like Ned is, the bridge there. Literally in these past 3 chapters, Ned's been in the middle. So I think, yeah, you're like, okay, who is this guy going to become? And then especially here when you're like, oh, he's grooming you for command. Like you're like, yeah, he's going to become Lord Commander. I think that's maybe as high as we get for Jon. Is more like he'll become Lord Commander and be really essential in protecting the realm from when the stuff with the White Walkers like really goes off the rails.
Even the kind of feints in the Tolkien direction are pushing us there, because this is a chapter with a Pip and a Sam, and the strapping young lad who wants to be the leader wants to be elevated to the position of ranger.
Yeah, sure.
So we're doing some Aragorn stuff there too.
Well, and even remember last John chapter I mentioned how once Sam's added to this group of guys who's being initiated, there are 9, and how many members of the Fellowship were there?
Yes.
9. In the werewood clearing, there are 9 werewood trees. I was like, why 9, George? Why 9? And that was the only thing I could think of. But I thought, oh, that's nice and clean. I like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot of just like big, like high fantasy, promised, chosen one stuff in here. And I got really excited about it.
Incredibly fruitful chapter.
Yeah, but done in such a special way. Not in a really overt way. Not in a really obvious, boring, traditional, predictable way. But in an interesting and thought-provoking and exciting way.
More subtext than text.
For
and again,
sure.
that Fire and Blood thing was fantastic.
Oh,
Great job on
No,
that.
I loved
amazing.
I loved all your stuff too. This was a really fun chapter.
If you want even more George R. R. Martin coverage from us over on the Patreon, $2 a month, you can support the show and get our entire Fire and Blood coverage where we talk about that book, the source material for the House of the Dragon show. That's 12 volumes. They're all massive blowout of analysis and theories, and just like the kind of stuff we do here, but I think even more intensive. Some of those took like a month to prep. Those were tough episodes.
Yeah, especially volume 12, because it was the whole first half of the book.
There's a lot there to dig into if you're interested in these kind of theories.
Yeah.
And of course, we'll be back here on Tuesday with another brand new episode. But just thank you again for listening to the show, for supporting the show, for spreading the word. We love the growth. We love the comments. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on Tuesday.